Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Credit Safe webinar. My name is Nathan Kolb, and I'm your host. And I'm excited to get into things today and get into this great topic. But first, I want to give you a little bit of introduction, a little bit of how we run things here. So I'm going to do that. I want to let you know that we want to interact with you. There will be opportunity all throughout this for you to go ahead and ask questions, make comments, all of that. The way you do that, at the bottom of your screen is this little thing that says Q&A. It's a little text bubble. So please go ahead, make sure to use that to ask questions. I will be monitoring that the entire webinar. So go ahead, I'll be checking it out. And as soon as I can get to that question and ask it of our guest today, I will go ahead and do so. The other things that I need to let you know about is, one, this is being recorded. This webinar is being recorded. So if that's a problem for you, please go ahead. You have a couple of moments here before we really get into things for you to go ahead and get out of the webinar. But because it is being recorded, we will be sending you a follow-up email that will give you this recording. It will give you a link to this recording, as well as any other pertinent links that we talk about throughout this time and any other upcoming webinars, because we want you to come back. We want to have this dialogue continually with you. So that's going on. I need to let you know too, this is a webinar series. This is part 2 of a 9-part webinar series. This is a webinar series in partnership with the National Association of Wholesaler-Distributors. And the entire thing is entitled Cash is Still King. And it's the idea that a lot of things had shifted, a lot of issues have happened, a lot of problems have happened or changes have happened due to the global pandemic. But at the end of the day, cash is still king. That cash flow, what's going on, is still king. And we have different topic areas, 4 of them actually, that we're talking about as we go through this. So just to give you a background on the companies in partnership here, the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors, or the NAW, is the national voice of the wholesaler distribution industry in Washington, D.C. NAW provides high value to its members and the wholesale distribution industry by advocating the interests of distribution companies before the government, providing groundbreaking, distribution-specific research and strategic management best practices via conferences, publications, and webcasts, and providing leading-edge products and services highly valued by industry peers. For those of you not familiar with CreditSafe, as the world's most used provider of business intelligence, CreditSafe owns and maintains one of the most expansive and comprehensive and rapidly expanding business databases with credit information on over 365 million companies worldwide. They're changing the way business information is used by offering a collection of products and solutions that help companies leverage domestic and international credit reports, company data, principal information, domestic and international judgments, and credit scores to make smarter business decisions. So for those of you that have joined us from the NAW side of the house, thank you so much. For those of you that are CreditSafe customers or familiar with CreditSafe, there's a bit of an introduction for you to NAW. Today's topic is the second part of the Know Your Customer, the importance of knowing your customer topic. So today, as we're going to do with every one of these topics as we go forward in this series, is we're talking to a practitioner, somebody who's doing this every day. It's great to hear from CreditSafe or from NAW, those of us that are in those organizations and those companies and doing that type of stuff. But what about the people that are doing this every single day, that this is a part of their daily routine and doing that? So we've put together these practitioner setups where you're going to get a practitioner's perspective on what's going on. So today I'm actually really excited and honored to be able to welcome Alvin Moreno, who is the Director of Global Supply Chain Credit Risk at Nestle, and is responsible for that financial risk assessment of vendors supplying Nestle markets around the globe. If that's not enough to just keep you busy and a mouthful of a title and everything there, Alvin's also on the planning and steering committees of USC's Center for Global Supply Chain Management and on the board of the Credit Management Association. He got this way just by his good looks and his charm. It's not by smarts or anything. He only has an MBA from the University of Laverne with concentrations in finance, supply chain management, and leadership, and a Master's of Science degree in leadership, also from Laverne. A Master's of Science in Global Supply Chain Management from USC in Los Angeles. So, I mean, he hasn't done any effort into this. He hasn't put effort into his career or in bettering himself. So, but he's who we could get. So we're gonna do it. No, Alvin, I said this before when you and I were talking. I am blown away by the efforts that you've put in, and to have you on here as a true expert in this area, I'm really excited to have you on. So welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. Well, like I
Absolutely.
said, I needed an excuse to be out of the house. So, got a degree after another degree after another degree. So, but yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm very familiar with Credit Safe and your products, and um, I've been associated with your product for it's been like 15 years now, I think.
It's been
So, yeah.
quite a while. It's been quite a while. So we're excited to have you on here. And yeah, I mean, it might have been a little funnier before the pandemic to be like, oh, I just had to get out of the house. Now we're all going, man, I wish I had taken those opportunities to get out of the house, whatever they were at the time.
Yeah.
So, but I want to jump in, and I want to talk, and we're going to talk a little bit about how you do things specifically, broader in the idea of KYC, and then also another topic or another term that you're going to bring up called KYS, and we'll talk about that in a minute here. But the first thing is just, can you give me an overview, an idea of the strategy, the way that Nestle has been using this idea of KYC, and then introduce us a little bit to KYS?
Sure. So basically, on knowing your customer, it's important to understand, the makeup of your customers and the opportunities that they bring with the shifts in demand. Like, for example, pandemic, COVID-19, it's caused a serious problem on the food service side of the business,
Sure.
but it's created a huge opportunity on the retail side. So
Mm-hmm.
then bringing in KYS, like know your supplier, if you think about it, you need your supply chain to get your product into your customer, ultimately to your end user. So one of the big challenges during COVID is the huge increase in demand on the retail side and the restriction there is in capacity in businesses. A company like Nestle, you struggle with capacity even though it's a huge company. And we see within our own suppliers that struggle to maintain that huge increase in demand.
Mm.
So it's been an issue that we've had to deal with. And on our customer side, you're talking about cash flow, obviously the limitations and the impact, and try to be close for a customer to make sure that we are getting those payments in and ensuring our cash flow and ensuring that we have that concept of cash is king, because at the end of the day, cash is king.
Absolutely. Yeah, that hasn't changed even with the changes in the economy and the way we're doing things because of that. And that leads me into another question. Have you seen a change in the concept of KYC or in the practice of KYC since the pandemic has started?
Well, absolutely. You have customers that can't pay you. You have
Okay.
customers that basically their operations have stopped and they're not going to be able to pay you until they open their doors again. Interestingly enough, though, some of these customers may be placing orders and you have to question, well, if your doors are closed, why are you placing orders? So you have to also consider if inventory has been sitting for a while, you may be looking at potential returns down the road of
Mm,
product that is already short-lived or
right.
potentially expired. So
Okay.
that's something that we're going to have to be dealing with down the road as doors start opening up.
Right. Okay. So as things start opening back up, then you're going to have that, oh, this, I can't sell this anymore, or I have too much of this, or what have you. And they're going to be trying to ship that stuff back.
Yeah, think about it. I mean,
Yeah.
so
It makes great sense with that. And has that been a shift also on your onboarding of new clients and new customers? Have you seen that? You're talking about existing customers, but what about new customers? Have you had any shifts or changes in that, in what you want to know about them, or how you want to treat them?
that's a very interesting question because, I mean, when you're looking at checking your customer, you're looking at the credit profile and the financial composition of the company. Well, the credit profile is basically based on historical events, how they've been paying their bills, and it doesn't necessarily capture any very recent issues. Now
Right.
look at the financials. Okay, the last financials on most companies are typically December 31st, 2019.
Yeah.
Okay, so COVID-19 started hitting, at least in the US, since March on. So it will not capture that effect. So now we have to look at it from a perspective of now take those results, model it going forward and assume if their business is, let's say, 40% food service, 60% retail, think about what happens if they lost that 40% and simulate it going forward. Can they still maintain operations? Do they still have cash flow? Can they still keep the lights on? Are they still going to be able to service debt? And that's where it's important to know your customer or your supplier for that matter,
Right.
and engage their principals and ask for updated financials year to date, or at least, have a conversation with them. What are you doing? I mean, are you getting assistance or are you getting additional funding? You will see that once a pandemic hit, a lot of companies tapped out their lines of credit with their banks.
Mm-hmm.
All right, to guarantee that they were going to have the money. Okay, they were going to have that cash flow or that liquidity in place in the event the banks were compromised. So
Sure.
that's a
Sure.
very important thing, because remember, the financial and the credit is lagging. The credit business intelligence is lagging, and the financials are historical. So you have to
Sure.
look at the effect going forward. I mean, it's not a new concept. When you have volatility in currencies and commodities like milks or petroleum, you actually basically look at, well, if milk lost a third of its value, now you have to look at, for every dollar in sales, they lost 30 cents,
Right.
model it and see if they can still sustain operations.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that gets industry and even company specific when you do that, which is something that's critical with this idea of know your customer, like you're saying, know your supplier. How's that actually going to affect you as you go forward? And yeah, we understand. I mean, Credit Safe's in the game of providing that financial intelligence, that business intelligence. But we even say it on our own with Mark Edwards, our country manager or our managing director, or even our CEO Matthew Debbage has said it. We are only as good as the data that's coming in. And sometimes that's a couple of days behind it is not, or a couple of weeks behind it is never, ever a substitute for that relationship that you build business to business. That's got to be the mainstay and the backbone of it. We just supplement that and provide even more verification of what's going on. So great points there. So as we're going through this and we're saying this, before we get too deep into it, what are some things that you've seen in your history in the industry and with your job at Nestle and the different things? What are some best practices that folks should be doing across the board for this idea of KYC or KYS?
Well, best practice is knowing where your concentration is.
Okay.
That's a very important thing. I mean, the 80-20 rule applies across the
Mm,
board, right? So whether it's on your suppliers or your customers, usually you're going to have a high concentration. Your top 100 customers are going to make up a significant amount of your business. Your top suppliers, whether it's 100 or your top 1,000, depending on the size of your company. I
sure.
mean, Nestle has over 500,000 suppliers worldwide. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, and you'll argue that at any given time, there might be about 100, 150,000 active suppliers.
Sure.
But when you look at the concentration, it's a fraction of that that makes up 80% of our spend. And then on
Mm,
top of that, look at your critical versus non-critical. And what I mean critical is the ones that will stop your production,
right.
ingredients, packaging, transportation.
Mm-hmm.
Same on your customer side. Sometimes we spin our wheels on the ones that really won't move the needle,
Right.
and we lose sight of the ones that can put us out of business or really hurt us. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I learned really early in my career that I might have a couple of companies go bankrupt that are small dollars. No one's going to ask anything. You have a large enough customer go bankrupt, you're gonna be in a meeting with your CFO and your principals are gonna want to ask, hey, where's the due diligence? What happened? Let me see the credit file. What kind of analysis took place? So don't lose sight of your key customers or your key vendors for that matter. That's the main best practice uh, I will suggest. And
Sure.
also, when you're looking at your agings, I mean, those little ones will not move the needle much. You
Right.
have one of those big ones all of a sudden, it's going to move the needle big time. So better to be ahead of the curve and be proactive than reactive.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And with that, I mean, how can folks be a little more proactive rather than reactive with all
So,
that's going on right now?
let me tell you, even before COVID, one of the challenges we had was we don't review our credit files weekly or monthly for that matter. We're lucky if we get them annually.
Okay.
So, and on vendors, it's the same thing. We might assess a vendor that's onboarded or a vendor, but we don't look at it again for a year, maybe 2 years.
Right.
In the meantime, anything can happen. Change of ownership, they lost a key account, it could compromise them. They had a recall, we will not see them. So we set up monitoring and
Hmm.
we'll depend on companies like CreditSafe to do all the dirty work for us,
Sure.
and have them, and we'll leverage you guys. So we'll let us know, hey, guess what? This company, whether it's a vendor or well, I'm sorry, whether it's a supplier or a customer, just triggered, you know, one of the monitoring criteria, whether it's change of ownership, the way they pay their bills, derogatory items, something. So that will alert us that maybe we don't, it's not up for review for another 11 months, 10 months, but that will trigger us. We need to look at that one.
Hmm.
What happened? And it might be a small event, an immaterial past due, fine. But if it's a class action lawsuit or a
Right.
recall, or hey, guess what? All of a sudden, everyone's putting them on hold, or something material enough happened that we might have to start holding orders or managing that credit line differently.
Right.
Or on the supplier side, it could be that we better start developing a BCP, which means a business continuation plan, because I've been in situations where, oh, they supply chicken, big deal. No, guess what? There's proprietary flavoring formulas in it, and you have to develop them. Or, and this is a real story about 10 years ago,
Hmm.
which initiated the whole process of looking at your suppliers at Nestle more carefully, we had a very large chicken provider go bankrupt. It's
Okay.
around 2009. And it compromised billion-dollar brands, okay?
Hmm.
And you would think, okay, call someone else. Yeah, well, there's a few weeks between hatching and slaughtering, so we
Right.
could have been out of product. Therefore, we would have had uh, idled productions. We wouldn't have been able to get our product out to our customers. And you would think, oh, okay, so 8 weeks later, 10 weeks, 22 weeks later, whatever the time is, well, we'll get products back on there. Yeah, well, you lose market share.
Sure.
And chances are, well, you're never going to recover that market share. Okay,
Right.
so it's not just the cost of vital production, it's market share. So this impacts your customers as well, because if you don't have widgets to sell, you know, you're not, if you don't sell, you're not going to get paid.
Absolutely. Yeah, and they can't sell a promise. They know it's
So,
coming. You can tell them it's coming, but if they don't have it on the shelves to sell, then there's nothing they can do either.
so apologize if I keep bouncing from KYC to KYS, but I look at it as an end to end. So,
Oh no, and I think a holistic view of that is a great thing and gives a bit more of a comprehensive view for the folks that are here listening in and watching us right now. So I
and
appreciate you doing that.
and actually it brings up a really good point, because credit credit professionals are risk professionals. We
Hmm.
manage risk and we manage decisions. So when I talked about that story with that chicken supplier back
Right.
in 2009, I saw the opportunity where credit could create and manage a supplier risk program. And that's what we ended up doing. So
Right.
it expanded the normal customer related footprint of credit into supply chain. And it gave us the
Hmm.
opportunity to get out of Nestle in the market in the US or North America and make it global, because the collection and the credit uh, elements might change from country to country, but not
Hmm.
the way you value risk of a vendor, how you assess their financial
Mm.
condition and their credit profile. That is pretty much standard, and it carries over from your customer to your supplier. Except that on the supplier, it's a little bit bigger universe. Like Nestle is a consumer packaged good company, food.
Right.
So we focus on food and food service, related products. On the supplier side, we look at the whole spectrum. We look at ingredients, packaging, commodities, and then we look at the currencies for the risk. So we're looking
Mhm.
at metals, we're looking at colorings, we're looking at the whole spectrum in industry.
Right. Right. And all of that, I would assume, is informing how you're going forward and making those decisions, whether or not to work with that supplier or increase demand from them or decrease it. Same with the customers. How much credit are we going to extend? How much product can we give them? Those type of things.
Yeah, same. I mean, think about it. When you're looking at a credit line, you basically look at a supplier looking at their capacity. Okay, you
Right.
want to give them a $100 million contract, but their annual revenues are only 25 million. Where are they getting this extra capacity?
Right.
Okay, so they have unutilized capacity of 20%. Uh, is that enough to accommodate? Okay,
Mhm.
does that account for seasonality? So, I mean, the training ground on the customer side basically helps you on the supplier side.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you were making a good point in the what we call our green room, and before this, when we're just chatting, you and I, about the mask industry and how that demand has shifted so differently.
Right.
So I was hoping you would talk about that for me for just a minute and kind of use that as an example here.
So that's the change in environment and opportunities created by COVID. So I mentioned that on the food service, we see a diminish in demand. We
Hmm.
see much less demand, but we've seen a huge increase in demand on the retail side. Why? Because people have rediscovered cooking at home, and obviously they
Yes.
had no choice. So
Right.
they might buy frozen pizzas or whatever and cook it at home or ingredients, but there's
Right.
a higher demand on that end. So like I mentioned the mask to simplify the explanation. Overnight, the industry of masks just exploded.
Hmm.
Everyone needs a mask. So now you see masks being sold everywhere. I mean, I go to Home Depot. Wow, I see masks.
Right.
And these are probably companies that before might have been manufacturing socks or underwear or something. All of a sudden, they're making cotton masks. Okay.
Right.
So think about retooling and preparing for this volume. You also have to think and be prudent about what happens when a vaccine is developed and all of a sudden people don't have to wear a mask. That could happen overnight.
Sure.
All of a sudden, your volume just dropped.
Right.
Can you go back to what you were doing before? Or are you unprepared and that's the end of it? You can no
Hmm.
longer sustain your operations. So there's opportunity, but you also have to look at down the road and the bigger picture, bigger effect. Same with your customers. All of a sudden, they're ordering more. Well, what happened? Did they have to rent more warehouse space? Did they have to hire more people? Did they have to expand their own capacity? Do they have trucks? Are they self-distributing? Do they basically use a third-party distributor? Uh, all of these things you should be looking at because once this thing stabilizes again, are they going to be compromised or are they going to be in a position that they can still continue?
Absolutely.
They're
Yeah, and I
little
think
things.
right. Well, and I think it's something we've seen, but we've always had a much longer time frame to deal with it. So, in the marketplace, shifts always are happening. Things are trending or moving or adjusting, but we always had more time. And now that years time has compressed into weeks or months. And it's
And,
and it's so much faster and the changes hit so much faster and harder.
and think about it. Right now, money's cheap. So people or companies can take out loans
Hmm.
and their interest is really low. Well, think about when interest goes up.
Sure.
Okay, are they going to be able to service these loans? I mean, there's been times in the past where money's cheap and companies have focused on buying back stock or buying other companies, growing through that. And then all of a sudden, interests are going up, economy slows down, and they can't sustain that anymore.
Right.
So now you see more bankruptcies, basically strategic bankruptcies to get out of assets, get out of mergers that didn't quite digest as they thought they would, or they thought the uh, synergies were there and they're not, or it was a lot more complicated to integrate them. So you have to look at all those factors.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I appreciate that kind of that holistic view again, as we've been talking about. So as folks are seeing this, and like I said, a lot of the 2020 kind of brought a lot of things into focus, has compressed a lot of things. For some folks, it's, I know my industry, I've been in it for 20 years, but they don't know the specific companies. And now they're finding that, like you were saying, they have, several thousand customers or suppliers or what have you, and they don't know each of them or know that top 20% that they really need to pay attention to. And now they're doing that. How would you advise them when they're building this KYC or KYS strategy as they're kind of moving into this space?
Well, again, look at your aging, look at your balances, look at where your largest chunks are and
Mm-hmm.
who they're made up of. I mean, and also look at the opportunity of looking at your vendors. Okay, making the case for that, because that's part of your supply chain. That's part of, getting your product out to your customers, right? There's a sourcing. It starts with sourcing all the way to the last mile delivery. So,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, look at your aging, look at your spend reports, and if you think about it, what are the largest, typically the largest assets in a company's balance sheet? It's usually AR and inventory, unless
Right.
you're capital intense and you're a manufacturer.
Sure.
But normally it's inventory and AR.
Right.
So think about it. So you have an opportunity to, hey, inventory is related to your the suppliers, and your AR is related to your customers. So
Right. Right. So it gives those two sides and just, drill down on them.
yeah.
And for those folks that are in it and are just trying to reassess and reset and kind of adjust how they're doing things right now due to the shifts that are constantly going on, do you have advice for them or practices that you would say to employ there?
Like I said, see where your concentration is. And you have to understand what industry that you're in. Are you directly impacted by COVID? Are you partially impacted by COVID?
Okay.
Uh, what kind of shift have you seen in volume right now? And is it stabilized? So that's the first thing I would do. I mean, how much of my business is food service compared to retail, as an example? How much of
Right.
my business is actually in a category that's directly impacted by COVID? And if it's not, so it's not, but it doesn't mean that I won't have an impact down the road, because it will impact demand. You don't have
Right.
as many people working. There's benefits out there. They're going to dry up in December. What is that going to happen to the economy, both local and globally? And you have to look at what could that translate to? Higher risk. I mean, if you look at, I'm not going to name your competitor. There's another global competitor of yours that underwrites their paper, and they're seeing a huge increase in bankruptcies for different countries
Mhm.
spread out for over the next 12 months. And these guys underwrite their own paper.
Right.
Okay. They insure debt. They
Yep.
also provide business intelligence, and they
Yep.
do financial analysis too. And you look at their data. You have data on it as
Absolutely.
well. Everyone has data. And that's something that you should be looking at. Take advantage of that, because it's going to put you ahead of any changes, or at least you'll be aware of them, and you'll be more in a more proactive position than a reactive position.
Absolutely. We always appreciate the shout outs and like I said, those same executives for our folks have said, hey, we expect everyone to be out there to be using multiple sources of data and multiple sources of financial intelligence. So don't worry about that one. We appreciate that. And that's honestly some of what you're talking about there is too. And I'll give a little plug because it's our webinar on, this is why we developed the COVID impact score so that folks can drill down, whether it be by industry or down deep down into the company level, and see what are the likely impacts are going to happen on this customer or on this supplier or on this vendor, whatever it is, due to what's going on in COVID, not just what has happened historically based on their credit history and all of those financials and things like that, like you were talking about. So trying to give that balance. But I appreciate that. And like you said, I think it just reinforced that idea that you have to look at the whole thing. If all you were doing was focusing on AR or just on your suppliers or whatever, you're missing part of the equation. I mean, is that fair to say?
It is, because you're looking at the risk to the whole organization. And maybe you don't have the opportunity to look at your suppliers. It's just an added dimension that I threw out there, and you're just
Sure.
looking at your customers, and that's fine. But you need to look at the business intelligence that's available, like what's going on with COVID, and it's an
Mhm.
added resource that can basically give you insight into which
Right.
one of your customers might be more impacted. And we've run into numerous, I mean, so far this year, we've had a couple of coffee traders. We're talking about, these trading houses.
Yes.
And we buy over $100 million a year from them. One went bankrupt,
Mm.
okay? One went out of business. We saw it coming. We saw the indicators. The
Right.
other one just restructured their debt.
Hmm.
They dodged the bullet, but we're looking at these and we were able to stay ahead of it. We
Right.
were not surprised. You do not want to be surprised with a bankruptcy, especially on your customer side when all of a sudden you have to report to management, I have this huge bad debt.
Right.
Now you have a lot of explaining to do.
Of course.
And
Of course.
I never like to be put in those positions. I don't know about you guys, but I don't. So
No, I wouldn't want to be in that position
I,
either. Although,
I,
that's
I,
not
I
been my fortune
rather,
so far.
yeah, I'd rather be in a position where, this is really risky. You bring it up to management's attention and let them make the business decision. Because
Sure.
if something goes wrong, you know, hey, we had this discussion. It was a business decision. And it might be something as simple as, hey, they go bankrupt, but when you figure out they will restructure and it looks like they'll be able to emerge. So
Hmm.
factor in the lost sales if we would have put them on hold, sales during, bankruptcy and exiting bankruptcy. So it's a different way of looking at risk and looking at the opportunity. But at
Absolutely.
least you need
Yep.
management's buy-in. You can't just go in there and say, "Oh, I looked at it this way." Yeah, no, I've had those discussions where it doesn't matter. I got a loss of $1 million,
Yeah.
but you would have
Yeah.
lost $3 million if we would put them on hold. Yeah, but I got to deal with this bad debt of $1 million, and they can't get past that.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. So informing it has got to be a big part of that as best as possible. So I've got one final question here, unless somebody else pops one in. That will be just for teams that are a little bit smaller. You work at Nestle. You have a giant corporation, as you've said. It's a worldwide company. For folks that have a little bit smaller of a team that only have so much to deal with, what can they do? What are some things that they can do? Some tactics they can employ, or things like that that will be best for them.
Funny that you say that because our credit department as a whole has about 70 to 80 people, but it's mostly US, hourly operating companies. But internationally, for the supplier side, my team, we're under 10. And we're dealing with over $50 billion in procurement dollars, managing 13,000 vendors, which is where we look at the concentration. So it's all about developing, if you can, and leveraging any scoring type of strategy.
Hmm.
Uh, and automate as much as you can. Because remember,
Right.
a lot of the credit, if you look at the credit, let's say data points, you're looking at, for example, how you're paying your bills, how long you've been in business, uh, and different factors like that. If you have financial indicators, that's great. You can take liquidity, leverage, profitability factors in there, fixed charge coverage ratios and things like that, and build some kind of scoring and tier it. Anything
Right.
under a certain level, maybe there's an opportunity to score. Anything over a higher level, you got to do a more comprehensive, qualitative and quantitative approach, but at least you're narrowing that book of business.
Sure.
Okay. And it goes back to your concentration, understanding your vendors. And when you look at
Right.
your customers, I'm sorry, when you're looking at your concentration, now you realize, oh, okay, so maybe my book of business is 500 customers for a smaller company, but maybe only 30 make up 80% of my sales, or 40 or 50 or 60. Now I know where I need to focus most of my time. And on the
Right.
smaller ones, I can get away with scoring or using a different type of solution and leverage your monitoring.
Hmm.
Okay. You have it available through Credit Safe or whatever source you're using,
Yes.
leverage it because it keeps you aware and you know I mean personally it makes me sleep better at night.
Sure. Sure.
Okay. The chances that I'm going to come into the office, or in today's environment, I repurpose my daughter's room. She's out in college in Michigan. So I open my laptop and be surprised. My chances of that are greatly diminished because of monitoring. So
Right.
try to automate tier, understand, who makes what percentage of your book of business, and take advantage of your monitoring.
Sounds great. Yeah. And
Those
if
are, and for the smaller teams, I'm
mhm.
global. So I deal with markets that are very small. I
Right.
mean, some markets are in, third world countries where, an exposure of 60,000 is a lot for them.
Right.
Okay. In the US, anything under $1 million is not a big deal. But in some of these markets, 60 grand is a lot of money. 50 grand is a
Sure.
lot of money. So yes, I can relate to that.
Right. Right. Well, I appreciate you giving that perspective too. And because we have companies like you said, like Nestle that are very large companies. Then we have companies that are small, just a few person operation or something like that attend these webinars. So I love giving that full perspective as best we can. Um, so Alvin, I appreciate this. This has been great. I could just keep talking to you, but we are running up against time here. And I want to respect everybody's time. Just thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your perspective here. And I just really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And folks, if you want to continue on with this, you want to continue learning, first of all, there'll be links to Alvin's LinkedIn and ways to get a hold of him in that regard in the email when we send you to the recording and everything. But also remember, we have an entire series. This was the second of 9. So we have 7 more webinars coming up, 3 more topics to cover: automation and integration, leveraging business intelligence and data, and collections in the pandemic economy. All of that's going on. So we have those coming up over the next several weeks to a couple of months, actually. So please feel free to check those out. The next one of these is automation and integration with CreditSafe's CTO, John Siri. That'll be Tuesday, October 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. And if you want to see all the upcoming webinars, you can go to info.creditsafe.com/webinars anytime and sign up for any of them, see what they are, and take your pick. But for us here at CreditSafe, for Alvin, for everybody, thanks so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Ciao.